It began with a whisper that grew into a political storm. On a sunny Friday morning in Washington, D.C., the White House briefing room was buzzing with anticipation. Reporters from every major news outlet had crowded in, phones poised, cameras rolling. At the center of the flurry was none other than Karoline Leavitt, the sharp-witted and fearless White House press secretary under President Donald J. Trump. At only 30, she had become a fiery media force, unafraid to spar, unapologetically conservative and surgically precise with her words. That day, however, the buzz wasn't just about policy updates or Trump's latest executive order on trade. Rumors swirled that Karoline was about to address something entirely unexpected. A bombshell involving Amazon founder Jeff Bezos and his fiancée, Lauren Sánchez. Leavitt stepped up to the podium in her signature blazer, white with an American flag pin. She gave a knowing smile. The room quieted. Her tone was casual but laced with a hint of amusement. "I'd like to start today by clearing up a few misleading headlines, particularly one that appeared in the Washington Post this morning," she said, pausing for dramatic effect. "You know, the paper owned by a certain tech mogul who enjoys flying in space more than staying grounded in reality." The room murmured. Everyone knew she was referring to Jeff Bezos. The article in question had criticized the Trump administration's renewed push for domestic manufacturing, calling it regressive and economically dangerous. The article, under Sanchez's name as guest columnist, was strangely personal, taking swipes not only at the administration but at Leavitt herself, referring to her as an inexperienced mouthpiece defending a dying ideology. Karoline leaned in slightly toward the microphone. "Lauren Sánchez may have a helicopter license, but she's clearly flying blind when it comes to facts. Let me offer her and her fiancé a little grounding." Reporters leaned forward, sensing what was coming. "Lauren, sweetheart," Karoline began with sarcastic sweetness, "you're free to criticize policy, but when you start dragging hardworking American families into your cocktail hour elitist monologues, expect a response." She clicked a remote, and a screen behind her displayed a chart comparing Amazon's outsourcing rates to U.S. manufacturing job losses. "While your fiancé plays astronaut and slashes warehouse jobs in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, President Trump has been bringing those jobs back. You called that regressive? We call it restoring dignity." Then came the real bombshell. "We have credible information," she continued, "that suggests certain editorial decisions in the Washington Post, especially those targeting the White House, are being influenced directly from Jeff Bezos' private residence in Beverly Hills. That's not journalism. That's propaganda with a view of the Pacific." The room exploded in flashes and shouts. Even the usually stoic front-row reporters looked stunned. "I'm not here to play nice with billionaires who exploit American labor and then lecture us from their yachts," Karoline added sharply. "Jeff Bezos may have built a tech empire, but he cannot buy his way out of the truth. Not on my watch." The press conference ended with reporters scrambling to file their stories. Within the hour, hashtags like #BezosMeltdown and #LeavittUnleashed were trending nationwide. Conservatives hailed Karoline's takedown as legendary, while Bezos' team went silent. Lauren Sánchez, on the other hand, issued a vague Instagram story about speaking truth to power, but it was clear that Karoline had struck a nerve. Back in his private office in Beverly Hills, Jeff Bezos wasn't just annoyed. He was furious. Throwing his phone across the room, he yelled, "She just declared war." He wasn't wrong. The next 48 hours would be nothing short of explosive. EFF Bezos was used to being in control of markets, of narratives, of newsrooms. But this was different. Karoline Leavitt's takedown of him and Lauren Sánchez had gone viral, and not in the flattering, curated kind of way his PR team usually manufactured. It had only been hours since the press briefing, but Bezos' team was already in crisis mode. His longtime public relations advisor, Max Winthrop, stood nervously in the middle of the ultramodern living room of Bezos' Beverly Hills mansion, attempting to calm his client down. "Jeff, we need to respond carefully," Max urged, holding a tablet displaying a collage of headlines. "Leavitt slams Bezos from the White House podium. Karoline exposes Amazon exploitation in fiery speech truth bomb or political vendetta." "Carefully," Bezos growled, pacing like a panther. "She just accused me of manipulating my own newspaper to attack the White House. That's libel." Max hesitated. Actually, it's a not, Jeff. This protected speech. Plus, she's not entirely wrong. The op-ed Lauren submitted was reviewed. Stop. Bezos cut him off with a raised hand. This isn't about facts. This is about perception. The American public just saw a 30-year-old MAGA warrior humiliate me in front of millions. She made me look like an out-of-touch elitist. Lauren Sánchez, lounging on the terrace with a glass of Pinot Grigio, offered a breezy shrug. Honestly, Jeff, she's just playing to her base. I wrote that piece to provoke. I didn't expect her to take the bait so publicly. You poked a hornet's nest, Bezos snapped. But it wasn't just public perception. Bezos feared what was coming next because Karoline didn't bluff. If she claimed to have information about the Washington Post's editorial manipulation, there was a chance she had whistleblowers inside. Or worse, someone had leaked internal memos. That evening, as the sun dipped over the Los Angeles hills, Bezos convened a high-level strategy session in his home. Executives from Blue Origin, Amazon, and the Post joined via encrypted video calls. The goal: discredit Karoline Leavitt before her words took root with the American public. Dig into her past, Bezos ordered. Find something, anything. A college essay, a high school tweet, a shady donor. I want dirt. Lauren Sánchez raised an eyebrow. You sure that's wise? If we start slinging mud, Trump's people will sling back harder. And Karoline's a media machine. She'll twist it into a martyr narrative overnight. I don't care, Bezos snapped. She embarrassed me on national television. I'm not letting this slide. What followed was a full-scale offensive. Anonymous sources began feeding tabloids with thinly sourced rumors about Karoline's time working in New Hampshire politics. One gossip blog claimed she once took an Uber ride without tipping the driver. Another implied she had a romantic link to a controversial conservative donor. It was petty, frantic, and embarrassingly ineffective. Because Karoline Leavitt didn't run from attacks, she incinerated them. Appearing that same night on Fox News with host Jesse Watters, Karoline smiled coolly when asked about the smear campaign. I suppose when billionaires feel threatened by a woman with a microphone and a backbone, they do what they do best, try to buy their way out of the mess they created, she said, unfazed. But I'm not for sale. The audience roared with approval. Watters leaned in. What do you say to Jeff Bezos, who's reportedly launching a counteroffensive against you? Karoline's eyes glinted with fire. I say this, you can launch rockets, Jeff, but you can't launch truth. The American people are watching, and they're seeing exactly who you are. Social media erupted again. Memes flew across timelines. Karoline depicted as Wonder Woman, Bezos as a shaken Lex Luthor. Commentators across conservative platforms praised her as the right's next Sarah Palin, only sharper and fearless. At the same time, something deeper was stirring. The American public, especially blue-collar voters and small business owners, began questioning Amazon's practices more openly. A viral TikTok video showed a former warehouse worker praising Karoline's words and accusing Bezos of treating employees like replaceable parts. In Washington, President Trump was grinning ear to ear. She's killing it, he told his staff. Absolutely demolishing him. Bezos thought he could buy power. Karoline's showing him what real power looks like. But behind the scenes, Karoline knew this wasn't over. Bezos wouldn't go down without a fight. And she was ready for the next round. It was barely 72 hours since Karoline Leavitt had dropped the first bombshell in the White House press room, and yet the political landscape already looked like a battlefield. But she wasn't done. On Monday morning, the country woke to another jolt, this time not from a speech, but from a leak. An anonymous whistleblower released a trove of internal emails from the Washington Post's editorial team. The contents were explosive. Several of the messages contained direct communication between Lauren Sánchez and one of the senior opinion editors. In one particularly damning exchange, Sánchez pressured the editor to slant the framing of an upcoming piece critical of President Trump's trade policy, and to specifically undermine the WH press secretary's credibility before she grows into a national figure. The editor, clearly uncomfortable, replied, "I'm not sure we can do that ethically, but I'll check with Bezos." Another email thread showed Bezos himself forwarding a critical op-ed with the note, "Use this tone. Let's make sure this goes viral." The emails were verified by multiple cyberforensics teams by midday. America was stunned. Mainstream networks like CNN and MSNBC initially tried to downplay the leak. But the New York Times eventually ran a major piece titled "Editorial Independence Compromised? Bezos, Sánchez, and the White House War of Words." The story dominated the next 24 hours. Karoline, meanwhile, issued a single tweet. "Told you. Collision." The hashtag Bezos leaks shot to the top of trending lists nationwide. Bezos' empire began to shake. Shares of Amazon dropped 4.7% as the media backlash intensified. The Washington Post issued a carefully worded internal memo stating that any perceived conflict of interest is being taken seriously and that an internal review was underway. But it was too late. That evening, Karoline joined Tucker Carlson, now broadcasting independently from his massively popular online platform. In a one-on-one interview that attracted over 20 million views in 48 hours, Karoline was in peak form. "This is not just about Bezos or Sánchez," she said calmly, dressed in deep navy with an American flag brooch. "It's about the corruption of influence. When billionaires believe they can buy newspapers to shape elections, or attack public servants or distort democracy, they need to be stopped. Period." Carlson nodded. "You didn't just hit a nerve. You exposed the whole nervous system. But here's the real kicker," she continued, reaching into her folder. "We've received communication from 3 former Washington Post staffers who confirm that Bezos' team routinely influenced editorial strategy, especially regarding the Trump administration." Tucker blinked. "And the mainstream media says Trump was the one manipulating the press?" Karoline smirked. "Exactly." By Tuesday morning, protests had erupted outside Amazon's DC headquarters. Grassroots movements, many of them previously unaffiliated with Trump's campaign, began rallying against what they were now calling the Bezos media complex. Some protesters held signs reading, "Leavitt equals truth," while others chanted, "Corporate lies must die." Bezos, watching from a private boardroom with his senior Amazon legal team, was visibly distraught. His voice cracked as he stared at footage of the protests. "How did this happen?" he muttered. Lauren, seated beside him in designer heels and an oversized cashmere sweater, gave a weary sigh. "You made her a target, Jeff, and you underestimated her reach." His chief legal officer, grim-faced, added, "This could get worse. If congressional Republicans get involved, they might subpoena the Post's records." Bezos ran a hand down his face. For the first time in decades, he looked rattled, powerless, vulnerable. He had built an empire meant to be untouchable, from cloud computing to next-day delivery, from newspaper headlines to space travel. And now, a press secretary in her 30s, working under the most media-scrutinized president in history, had punched through the armored eye in the White House. Karoline Leavitt walked past the portrait of President Reagan, smiling to herself. Her team buzzed around her, phones lighting up with interview requests, supporter emails, and Republican congressmen asking for talking points. President Trump walked into the room and clapped her on the shoulder. "You just took down the richest man in the world," he said proudly. "How does it feel?" Karoline looked him in the eye. "Like the truth is finally getting its day." But this was only the beginning. Because when power is threatened, it doesn't retreat quietly. By Wednesday morning, the war between Jeff Bezos and Karoline Leavitt had fully eclipsed every other story in the media. Forget the economy, foreign policy, even celebrity gossip. The American public was glued to a political showdown that had the gravity of a national reckoning and the drama of a Netflix series. The stakes weren't just reputational anymore. They were political, financial, existential. Bezos wasn't just worried about bad press now. Major Republican figures were calling for an antitrust investigation into Amazon's business practices. Several senators from red states, backed by Trump, began drafting a proposal to strip big tech companies of certain federal subsidies and legal protections, specifically citing the Washington Post leaks as justification. In response, Bezos activated what insiders called his Titan Protocol, a high-level crisis response strategy normally reserved for catastrophic business threats. Former intelligence operatives turned consultants, elite PR fixers from Silicon Valley, and even a retired Clinton-era speechwriter were flown in to handle the situation. This isn't just about Jeff's image anymore. One strategist whispered to another at the emergency strategy meeting held at Amazon's Seattle headquarters. This is about stopping Karoline before she galvanizes a whole new wing of Trump's base. The plan? Discredit her, undermine her, divide her supporters, and if all else failed, drown her out with noise. One of the first steps was to leak a memo alleging that Karoline had met privately with extremist donors during the 2024 campaign. The claim was weak and based on circumstantial evidence, but the goal wasn't accuracy. It was confusion. Saturate the media landscape with just enough doubt to make her seem morally compromised. But again, it failed. Within hours of the leak, Karoline held a surprise press conference on the White House lawn. With reporters from the Post, CNN, NBC, and Fox News all present, she stepped up to the podium with receipts in hand. "I've never met with the individuals mentioned in that bogus report," she said calmly. "But I do have evidence showing that a private communications firm linked to Amazon drafted the very smear document now being circulated." Funny how that works. A collective gasp moved through the crowd of reporters. The cameras clicked faster. The microphones inched closer. "And let me say this," she continued. "If Jeff Bezos wants to keep this going, I'm ready. I'm not just a press secretary. I'm a fighter for transparency. And I'm not scared of billionaires who think they can play puppet master with American democracy." The press erupted. Online, conservative influencers launched the hashtag Karoline versus Goliath, propelling the story into an even broader cultural moment. Young Republican women in particular began coalescing around Leavitt's image, calling her the conservative AOC, but with brains, spine, and real-world grit. And even more importantly, the Trump base, once skeptical of some establishment Republicans, now fully embraced Karoline as one of their own. Rallies across swing states began holding up signs reading, "Karoline Unleashed," and "Bezos Can't Buy America." But Bezos wasn't about to surrender. Behind the scenes, he held a confidential meeting with high-level Democratic donors and Silicon Valley leaders. Sitting in a private room in a San Francisco compound, he made a chilling declaration. "Trump won't last forever. Leavitt's rising now, but we will outlast her. This isn't about 2025, it's about controlling 2030 and beyond. We'll build our own pipeline of leaders, media channels, and tech platforms. If Karoline wants a war, we'll show her what an empire looks like." But even as he made the statement, his voice betrayed him, quivering just slightly. Because deep down, Jeff Bezos had realized something he couldn't quite admit to his advisors. This wasn't a typical PR battle. This was a seismic cultural shift, a generational pushback against the elite echo chambers. Karoline wasn't just popular. She was resonating with people across demographics. From young mothers in Ohio to veterans in Arizona, Americans were tired of being lectured by billionaires flying in on private jets, and at the center of this storm was a young woman with a New Hampshire accent, an iron spine, and an unmatched ability to weaponize truth in the age of propaganda. But Karoline herself wasn't getting comfortable as she returned to the West Wing that evening. She knew Bezos wasn't finished. He was wounded, but not defeated. Her team had just informed her of a planned counterattack. Something big. Something that involved a surprise media exposé from an international outlet, allegedly containing personal information about her family, meant to intimidate her into silence. She sighed, placed her notes on the table, and turned to her communications director. "They're not backing off," she said. "No," he replied. "They're doubling down." Karoline stood tall. "Then we hit back. Twice as hard." The sun was rising over Washington, D.C., casting a soft orange glow across the marble columns of the Capitol. But the mood in the White House was anything but serene. Karoline Leavitt, now the face of an unexpected political awakening, stood at her office window, watching protesters form in Lafayette Square. Signs waved in the breeze. "Stop tech tyranny. Karoline for truth. Bezos equals billionaire bully." The plan to intimidate her had backfired spectacularly. Just 2 days earlier, The Guardian published an exclusive exposé, supposedly containing dirt on Leavitt's personal life, family debts, out-of-context college text messages, and even a completely fabricated story about her allegedly lobbying for a pharmaceutical firm during her early career. Within hours, Karoline's legal team, with backing from the Trump administration, issued a cease and desist and threatened international defamation lawsuits. But instead of silencing her, the hit piece only fueled the fire. What the Bezos-aligned media didn't realize was that Americans, especially in the post-2024 era, had grown tired of elite smear campaigns. They recognized manipulation when they saw it. Instead of condemning Karoline, they rallied to her. Fox News ran a 24-hour special titled, "The Smear Heard Around the World: Why the Media Fears Karoline Leavitt." Elon Musk posted on X, "The attacks on at Cleveton are textbook elitist desperation. She's winning. Stay strong." Even Tulsi Gabbard, a known political independent, tweeted, "You don't have to agree with Karoline on everything to see what's happening. She's being targeted because she threatens the system. Period." It was a tidal wave. So Karoline decided to go all in. She called a nationally televised press conference, this time from the East Room of the White House. The flags were perfectly positioned behind her. The air buzzed with anticipation. "I want to speak to the American people," she began, looking directly into the cameras. Not as a press secretary, not as a Trump administration official, but as a daughter of a working-class family from New Hampshire who's had enough. She paused. "We are standing at the edge of something dangerous, a world where billionaires believe they can silence the truth, where owning a newspaper gives you a license to lie, where your influence is measured not by your character, but by your bank account." The room was silent. "For weeks, I've been attacked. My integrity, my family, my career, dragged through the mud. But here's what Jeff Bezos doesn't understand. I will not back down." Applause erupted from those present, unusual for a press conference. The feed went viral in real time. Live streams were watched in churches, diners, union halls, and school auditoriums. America wasn't just listening, they were cheering. Then came the final blow. Karoline held up a USB drive. "Today, I'm turning over digital documents to Congress proving that Bezos and his inner circle attempted to coordinate a media strategy not only to attack the Trump administration, but to manipulate stock prices and political narratives for personal gain." Gasps filled the room. "I call on the House Oversight Committee and the Department of Justice to launch a full investigation into Amazon's media practices and political interference. The American people deserve better." Within an hour, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson announced a formal inquiry. Back at Amazon's headquarters, Jeff Bezos sat in stunned silence. The war he launched to silence Karoline had turned into a boomerang that shattered the credibility of his media empire. Lauren Sánchez, tight-lipped and clearly frustrated, finally said it aloud, "You should have left her alone." Bezos didn't reply, he simply stood, walked to his office window, and stared out at the Seattle skyline. His legacy now tangled in scandal and backlash. That evening, President Trump hosted Karoline for a private dinner at the White House residence. The president toasted her with a glass of Diet Coke. "You know," he said with a grin, "I thought I was the media's worst nightmare, but it looks like you just took that title." Karoline chuckled, lifting her glass. "To truth bombs." They clinked glasses. And as the camera panned out over 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the world understood something new. Karoline Leavitt wasn't just a press secretary anymore, she was a force. And the age of billionaire immunity in American politics? That era had just come to an end.